The conference room fell silent as Dr. Marcus Blackwood, head of R&D at Meridian Aerospace, held up the broken prototype like a judge delivering a verdict. "You're just the janitor's daughter," he sneered, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. A ripple of laughter followed, polite, cold, and cutting. 23-year-old Emma Carter stood rooted to the spot, her heart pounding as Blackwood pointed at her, his smile devoid of kindness. "Go on, cleaning girl," he mocked. "Show us what you've got." Clutching the wrench-shaped pendant around her neck, Emma stayed silent, but her mind raced. "Has anyone ever written you off before you even had a chance to speak? We've all felt that sting. Share your story in the comments below." The morning sun spilled across the sleek glass towers of Meridian's campus as Emma badged in at 6:30 a.m., slipping into the building before the executives and senior engineers arrived in their tailored suits, murmuring about projects she could only dream of touching. Her internship badge, pale blue, a constant reminder of her temporary status, weighed heavy as she descended to the basement lab. There she catalogued spare parts and ran diagnostics on equipment the higher-ups ignored. Emma, a summa cum laude MIT aerospace engineering graduate, wasn't here to clean, she was here to build. Which city in the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you've ever had a confrontation with the HOA. We'll narrate your story on our channel. Her thesis on quantum propulsion earning praise from professors who had whispered about breakthrough potential. But here at Meridian, she was simply Robert Carter's daughter, the quiet man who had swept these same floors for 15 years before lung cancer claimed him 6 months ago. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now worked in the same building where her father had once cleaned. Though she occupied a different kind of invisible space, one reserved for those who were qualified enough to be useful but not connected enough to matter. The emergency meeting announcement crackled through the intercom system just after 9 a.m. Dr. Marcus Blackwood's authoritative voice summoning all engineering personnel to Conference Room A immediately. Emma knew she wasn't technically invited. Her supervisor had made it clear that interns observed from the sidelines, but something in Blackwood's tone suggested a crisis, and her curiosity had always been stronger than her sense of self-preservation. She slipped into the back of the conference room just as the lights dimmed and Blackwood began his presentation, his silver hair gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights as he gestured toward the massive screen displaying Project Quantum Drive. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blackwood announced, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "We have a problem. Our quantum engine, 3 years and $50 million in development, has been producing catastrophic resonance failures during every test sequence. The board is breathing down our necks, our military contracts are in jeopardy, and frankly, our best minds are stumped." The room fell silent as he clicked to the next slide, showing a complex maze of twisted metal and scorched components. "We have 48 hours to find a solution, or this project and potentially this company faces an uncertain future." Emma studied the images from her position near the door, her mind automatically analyzing the failure patterns she could see in the wreckage. The quantum resonance chambers showed signs of harmonic distortion, the kind that occurred when frequency calculations were off by even fractions of a percent. She had seen similar patterns in her thesis research, had spent countless nights in MIT's lab working through the mathematical models that governed quantum field interaction. Her father's old textbooks, the ones he had saved from his abandoned engineering degree, had helped her understand the fundamental principles that these expensive consultants seemed to be missing. "The frequency modulation is wrong," she whispered to herself, not realizing she had spoken aloud until several heads turned in her direction. Dr. Blackwood's piercing grey eyes found her immediately, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition to something that looked suspiciously like disgust. "I'm sorry," Blackwood said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But I don't believe we invited the cleaning staff to this meeting." The room erupted in uncomfortable laughter as Emma felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. She should have left then, should have backed out of the room and returned to her basement sanctuary, where her presence was tolerated, if not welcomed. Instead, she found herself stepping forward, her hand unconsciously touching the small wrench pendant that hung around her neck, a piece of her father's old toolbox that she wore as a reminder of his unwavering belief in the power of understanding how things worked. "I'm Emma Carter," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "MIT graduate, aerospace engineering, currently working as an intern in diagnostics." The laughter died as Blackwood's expression hardened, his lips curling into what might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth. "Ah, yes," he said, his tone making her name sound like something distasteful. "The janitor's daughter. I suppose we should be grateful that Meridian provides opportunities for those less fortunate." The words hit her like physical blows, each syllable carefully chosen to remind everyone in the room of her place in their hierarchy. But as Emma looked around at the faces surrounding her, some embarrassed, some amused, most simply indifferent, she realized that her father had faced this same dismissal every day for 15 years, had endured the casual cruelty of people who measured worth by pedigree rather than character or capability. The silence in Conference Room A stretched like a taut wire as Dr. Blackwood savored what he clearly considered a teaching moment. Emma stood near the door, every instinct screaming at her to flee, but her feet seemed rooted to the polished floor as 20 pairs of eyes dissected her presence. She could feel their assessment, the janitor's daughter playing dress-up in a world where she didn't belong. Marcus Chen, the lead systems engineer she had admired from afar, shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. "You know what?" Blackwood continued, his voice taking on theatrical quality. "Since you seem to have insights that have escaped our team, of PhD engineers, perhaps you'd like to share your expertise with us?" He gestured toward the mangled engine displayed on screen, his smile sharp as glass. "Please, Miss Carter, enlighten us about what we've been doing wrong." Several executives chuckled, the sound echoing like breaking china. Emma felt something crack inside her chest. She thought of all the nights her father had worked double shifts to pay for her textbooks, his hands cracked and stained, but always gentle as he helped with her homework. He had believed in her when no one else would. And now she stood at the threshold of justifying that faith or watching it crumble. "The harmonic resonance frequency is calibrated incorrectly," she said, her voice cutting through the residual laughter. The room fell silent, but this time the quality was different, sharper, more attentive. "You're treating quantum field interactions as linear progressions, but they follow logarithmic curves that compound exponentially under stress. The engine isn't failing because of design flaws, it's failing because the mathematical foundation assumes conditions that don't exist in real-world applications." Blackwood's smile faltered before reasserting itself with renewed venom. "How fascinating. And I suppose you learned this revolutionary insight from your father's mop bucket." The cruelty was casual, practiced. Emma watched Marcus Chen flinch and look away as the room collectively decided that witnessing humiliation was preferable to preventing it. "My father taught me that machines don't lie." "Only people do," Emma replied quietly, her fingers finding the wrench pendant. "He also taught me that understanding how something works is more important than understanding how to talk about it." Blackwood stood abruptly, walking to the wall display. "You know what, Miss Carter?" he said, turning back with the expression of someone delivering a killing blow. "I'm going to give you an opportunity to prove these bold theories. 2 hours alone in Lab 7 with the prototype. If you can make our $50 million failure work, then perhaps we'll all learn something about inherited wisdom." The trap was obvious, designed to ensure her humiliation would be public and complete. 2 hours wasn't enough time to diagnose a complex system that had defeated teams for months. Emma understood that Blackwood wasn't offering her a chance to succeed. He was offering her a chance to fail spectacularly. Instead, she looked directly into his eyes and nodded. "I accept, but I have one condition." Blackwood raised an eyebrow, amused by the idea that she might negotiate. "When I fix your engine," Emma continued, her tone steady, "I want you to apologize publicly to everyone in this room for every assumption you've made about who I am based on my father's job title." The room erupted in startled murmurs as Blackwood's expression shifted through surprise to calculation before settling back into cold amusement. "Deal," he said, extending his hand with the confidence of someone who had never lost a certain bet. "Though I suspect you'll be the one apologizing when this is over." Emma shook his hand, wondering what had happened to make him so invested in keeping others from climbing the ladder he had obviously ascended himself. Lab 7 hummed with quiet tension as Emma entered alone. The space feeling like a cathedral of technology where broken dreams came to rest. The quantum engine waited like a mechanical puzzle that had defeated dozens of brilliant minds. She placed her father's notebook next to the console, not out of nostalgia, but strategy. Robert Carter always said, "Machines talk, but few people listen." "Talk to me," she whispered to the engine, connecting diagnostic cables and watching. Data streams fill her screens. The patterns looked familiar from her MIT research, but felt wrong somehow, too consistent to be random failures. Her father's voice echoed clearly. "You're going to change the world, sweetheart. Don't let anyone tell you that where you come from matters more than where you're going." Within an hour, she found the first discrepancy. A frequency modulation. Setting deviated from specifications by less than 3%, subtle enough to pass quality checks but significant enough to create catastrophic failures under stress. Emma traced the modification through engineering logs and found a series of optimizations implemented 6 months ago, each approved by Dr. Blackwood himself. The second discrepancy followed minutes later, buried deeper in control algorithms and masked by legitimate-looking code comments. Her pulse quickened as she realized this wasn't random error. Someone had deliberately sabotaged the engine, introducing flaws designed to ensure failure while appearing to be theoretical miscalculations. Her tablet chimed as historical maintenance logs appeared. Data she hadn't requested but somehow could access. Scrolling through months of entries, a familiar name made her freeze. Robert Carter, maintenance technician, had flagged unusual vibrations in quantum resonance chamber housing 18 months ago, recommending investigation. The final line made her vision blur. Request meeting with engineering supervisor to discuss potential safety implications. The request stamp told everything. Denied. Monsieur Blackwood, head of R&D. Her father had tried to save this project and been silenced by the same arrogance that now surrounded her. Emma looked up at the security camera, knowing her every move, was watched by people expecting her to fail. With deliberate precision, she began documenting her findings, building a case that would solve the immediate problem and expose the deeper corruption. Her father's voice echoed clearly now. Machines. Don't lie, sweetheart. Only people do. The maintenance system revealed a pattern that chilled Emma to the bone. More than one report had been ignored, a systematic burial of legitimate safety concerns spanning nearly 2 years. Every warning about vibrations, temperature spikes, and frequency irregularities had been acknowledged, filed, and forgotten, each bearing Dr. Blackwood's electronic signature, dismissing them as non-critical maintenance observations. Emma cross-referenced her father's 18-month-old report with the engineering modifications implemented afterward. The connection was undeniable. Every concern raised by maintenance staff had been countered by improvements that actually worsened the underlying problems. Blackwood hadn't just ignored the warnings, he had used them as a roadmap for sabotage. The lab door chimed as Marcus, Chin entered with coffee and nervous energy. "Thought you might need this," he said quietly, then saw her expression. "What did you find?" Emma made a decision that would change everything, turning her tablet toward him. His face shifted from confusion to shock to anger as he absorbed the evidence. "Jesus," he breathed. "Blackwood's been setting us up to fail from the beginning." "My father saw this 18 months ago," Emma said, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. Every warning ignored, every safety concern buried. Then Blackwood made sure the problems got worse. Chen nodded grimly, pieces falling into place. "That explains those frequency modifications last spring. I thought he was being thorough, but he was guaranteeing failure." Chan began photographing the displays while Emma worked to reverse the sabotage built into the control systems. Each correction felt like vindication for her father's memory, honoring warnings that had been silenced by corporate arrogance. The engine responded immediately, its quantum chambers achieving stable harmonics for the first time in months. As the machine hummed with perfect efficiency, Emma realized Blackwood would soon know exactly what she had discovered through security feeds. "Marcus," she said urgently, "if something happens to me or this evidence disappears, someone else needs to know." He nodded, understanding they were no longer just fixing an engine. They were exposing a conspiracy that threatened everything her father had believed about justice and truth. There was no more time for grief. The data was clear. The sabotage was deliberate. Now she needed to expose it before it disappeared forever. The lab door burst open with enough force to make the quantum engine's delicate monitoring equipment shiver, and Dr. Blackwood strode in with the purposeful aggression of a man who had just watched his carefully constructed world begin to crumble. Through security camera feeds, his usually perfect silver hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his eyes held a dangerous combination of panic and rage that made Emma instinctively step back from the workbench. Marcus Chen moved, protectively closer to her, his phone still clutched in his hand with photographic evidence of everything they had discovered. "Well, well," Blackwood said, his voice carrying a forced casualness that fooled no one in the room. "It seems our little maintenance princess has been busy playing detective instead of focusing on the impossible task I gave her." He gestured toward the humming quantum engine with theatrical disdain, though Emma noticed that his eyes kept darting toward the diagnostic displays showing perfect performance parameters. "I suppose you think you've accomplished something remarkable here." Emma felt her father's wrench pendant warm against her skin as she faced the man who had destroyed so many lives for personal profit. "I fixed your engine," she said simply, her voice carrying across the lab with startling clarity. "More than fixed it, actually. I restored it to specifications that you deliberately sabotaged, and I improved the efficiency by 12% using harmonic resonance principles that my father understood." "Better than your entire engineering team." Blackwood's facade of casual amusement cracked like ice under pressure, revealing the calculating predator beneath. "Your father," he said, his tone dripping with contempt that no longer bothered to disguise itself, "was a janitor who didn't know his place, just like his daughter." He moved closer to the workbench, his presence filling the space with barely contained menace. Do you really think anyone will believe that a maintenance worker's daughter outsmarted teams of PhD engineers? Do you think anyone will care about your little conspiracy theories when I tell them you've been sabotaging this project from the inside? The maintenance logs don't lie, Emma replied, holding up her tablet with steady hands, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Neither do the financial records showing your stock purchases in Titan Aerospace. Neither do the modification orders that turned a working engine into a guaranteed failure. She watched as color drained from Blackwood's face, his confident expression faltering as he realized how much evidence she had compiled against him. Marcus Chen stepped forward, his phone recording everything as he added his voice to the confrontation. I've seen the documentation, Dr. Blackwood. Emma's father filed multiple reports about the exact problems that have been plaguing this engine, and you buried every single one of them. Then you implemented modifications that made those problems worse, all while building a financial position that would profit from this project's failure. Blackwood's laugh was harsh and bitter, the sound of someone who had been cornered but wasn't ready to surrender. You think this is about money? He asked, his voice rising with emotion that seemed genuine for the first time. You think I destroyed my own career for some stock options? He moved to the far side of the lab, putting distance between himself and his accusers, as if preparing for a different kind of battle. Your father, he continued, his voice taking on a confessional quality that was somehow more disturbing than his earlier threats, wasn't the first maintenance worker to think he understood systems that were beyond his education level. 20 years ago, I was passed over for department head because the board decided that a janitor's son with an MIT degree was more qualified than someone who had worked his way up through the ranks the hard way. Emma felt something cold settle in her stomach as she realized that Blackwood's motivations ran deeper than simple greed. I learned that day that it doesn't matter how smart you are or how hard you work if you don't have the right connections, the right background, the right last name, Blackwood continued, his eyes fixed on something beyond the lab walls. So I made sure I would never be vulnerable to that kind of humiliation again. I eliminated the competition before it could eliminate me. Your father was just collateral damage in a war that started long before either of you existed. Emma felt the weight of generational pain in Blackwood's confession. The recognition that he had become the kind of person who had once crushed his own dreams. You became everything you once hated, she said softly, understanding flooding through her, despite her anger. You turned into the system that tried to destroy you, and then you used that system to destroy others who reminded you of who you used to be. And it worked perfectly, Blackwood replied, his voice regaining some of its earlier venom. Until today, until you decided to play hero and dig up ancient history that should have stayed buried. He moved back toward the workbench, his expression shifting to something that looked almost like admiration. You're more like your father than you know, too smart for your own good, too stubborn to leave well enough alone, too naive to understand that some fights can't be won. The quantum engine's steady hum seemed to grow louder in the silence that followed, its perfect harmonics a testament to principles that transcended the human failures surrounding it. Emma realized that this moment would define not just her own future, but potentially the futures of everyone who had been silenced by systems designed to protect the powerful at the expense of the truth. You're right about one thing, she said finally, her voice carrying the strength of every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. I am like my father, but unlike you, I haven't forgotten that understanding how things work means understanding how to make them work better for everyone. The conference room had never seemed smaller than it did when Emma walked back through its doors, flanked by Marcus Chen and followed by a quantum engine that hummed with perfect efficiency on its mobile transport platform. The executives and engineers who had witnessed her earlier humiliation now sat in stunned silence as diagnostic displays showed performance parameters that exceeded every design specification by significant margins. CEO James Harrison leaned forward in his chair, his expression shifting from skepticism to amazement as he absorbed the implications of what he was seeing. Dr. Blackwood entered the room with the careful composure of a man walking toward his own execution. His earlier panic replaced by the resignation of someone who understood that certain battles could no longer be fought or won. Emma watched him take his usual position at the front of the room, noting how the other executives unconsciously leaned away from him as if his presence had become somehow contaminated by the truth that was about to be revealed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Emma began, her voice carrying clearly through the conference room that had witnessed her humiliation just hours earlier. "I've not only repaired the quantum engine, but restored it to its original design specifications." Specifications that were deliberately sabotaged over the past 18 months by someone in this room. She activated her tablet's presentation mode, filling the wall display with maintenance logs, financial records, and engineering modifications that painted an undeniable picture of systematic betrayal. The room erupted in shocked murmurs as the evidence unfolded across multiple screens, showing how Robert Carter's warnings had been ignored, how legitimate concerns had been buried, and how modifications designed to ensure failure had been implemented under the guise of improvements. Emma watched as faces around the conference table shifted through confusion, recognition, and finally anger as the scope of the deception became clear. My father died believing that his concerns hadn't been taken seriously because he was just a maintenance worker, Emma continued, her voice steady despite the emotion underlying every word. He never knew that his warnings were suppressed because they threatened a plan that required this project to fail catastrophically. She clicked to the financial records showing Blackwood's stock purchases, watching as several board members' expressions hardened with the recognition of corporate betrayal. Marcus Chen stood up slowly, his movement drawing attention throughout the room as he began to applaud. The sound was sharp and clear in the tense silence, a declaration of support that carried more weight than any speech. "I've worked with Emma's father for years," he said, his voice carrying across the room with quiet authority. "Robert Carter taught me more about understanding complex systems than any textbook or training program. He saved this project 18 months ago, and his daughter just saved it again." The applause spread like wildfire through the conference room as other engineers began to stand, their faces reflecting a mixture of admiration, shame, and determination to make amends for their earlier silence. Sarah Williams from the propulsion team stood next, her voice cracking with emotion as she added her testimony. "Mr. Carter helped me troubleshoot my first major system failure when I was fresh out of college. He never made me feel stupid for not knowing something, never acted like his knowledge was more important than teaching me to understand." One by one, other voices joined the chorus of support, each person sharing memories of Robert Carter's quiet wisdom, his willingness to help, regardless of hierarchy or protocol, his fundamental decency in a corporate environment that often rewarded the opposite. Emma felt tears streaming down her face as she realized that her father's influence had extended far beyond what she had ever imagined, that his legacy lived on in the careers and lives he had touched through simple acts of kindness and understanding. Dr. Blackwood stood frozen at the front of the room as his colleagues turned away from him, their expressions ranging from disgust to betrayal to simple disappointment in someone they had trusted with their professional futures. "You don't understand," he said desperately, his voice rising above the applause that continued to fill the room. "I was protecting this company from the kind of mediocrity that destroys excellence. I was ensuring that standards meant something." "No," Emma replied, her voice cutting through his rationalizations with surgical precision. "You were protecting yourself from competition, from the possibility that someone like my father might prove that wisdom doesn't require credentials and excellence doesn't require privilege." She looked around the room at faces that had been transformed by truth, at people who were remembering what integrity looked like when it wasn't filtered through self-interest. CEO Harrison stood slowly, his expression grave as he absorbed the full implications of what had been revealed. "Dr. Blackwood," he said, his voice carrying the finality of executive judgment, "you are terminated immediately. Security will escort you from the building, and our legal department will be cooperating fully with any criminal investigation that may follow." The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence that followed, a pronouncement that carried the weight of justice finally served. Emma felt her father's presence in that moment, as if he were standing beside her, watching the truth finally emerged from the shadows where it had been hidden for so long. The quantum engine continued its perfect humming, a mechanical vindication of principles that transcended human weakness in corporate politics. She touched the wrench pendant at her throat and whispered a promise that only she could hear. "They'll remember your name now, Dad. They'll remember what you tried to tell them." 6 months later, Emma Carter stood before a packed auditorium at the National Aerospace Innovation Conference, her keynote address drawing industry leaders, government officials, and aspiring engineers from universities across the country. The Carter Quantum Drive now powered 3 space missions and had earned Meridian contracts worth over $2 billion. But the young woman at the podium seemed more interested in honoring the human story behind the technology. "My father never lived. To see his warnings validated," Emma said, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed auditorium. "But he taught me that the greatest innovations come not from privilege or credentials, but from the courage to listen when machines and people are trying to tell us something important." She clicked to a slide showing Robert Carter in his maintenance uniform, his weathered hands holding the same wrench that now hung around her daughter's neck. Dr. Marcus Blackwood had been sentenced to 4 years for corporate sabotage and securities fraud. His career destroyed by the same arrogance that had once seemed like strength. Emma had been promoted to Director of Quantum Propulsion Research, becoming the youngest department head in company history and establishing new protocols, ensuring maintenance workers could report concerns without fear of retaliation. Marcus Chen, now her deputy, had helped transform their department into a model for inclusive innovation. The Robert Carter Memorial Scholarship Fund provided full college funding for working-class students. Each recipient selected not just for academic achievement, but for demonstrating the moral courage that had defined its namesake. The quantum engine that had started as an instrument of sabotage had become a symbol of what was possible when truth flourished without the distortions of prejudice. As Emma concluded her address, she held up the wrench pendant that had become a talisman in aerospace circles. "My father used to tell me that machines don't lie, only people do," she said, her voice carrying hard-won truth. "But I've learned something else. When people stop lying to themselves and start listening to voices they've been taught to ignore, that's when real innovation becomes possible." That evening, alone in her office overlooking the Meridian campus, Emma opened her father's notebook and wrote on the first blank page. "The most powerful engines are built not in boardrooms, but in the hearts of people who refuse to accept that. Things have to stay broken Today, Dad, your voice finally broke through the noise. Tomorrow, we make sure it's never silenced again. Have you ever been told you weren't qualified for something just because of where you came from? Don't let anyone convince you that your background disqualifies you from changing the world. Share your story below because sometimes one small wrench can indeed turn the entire world. If you enjoyed this one, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more wild tales coming your way.